In my 6 years of experiencing Bee Swarm both on and off, 3 of those years have been me being more of a red-oriented player. Looking back on the history of Red Hives, we've undergone quite the transformation over the years. So many Red Hive guides have been flowing through the community, always with constant updating information. Many new mechanics have also been added, and our playstyle has become more and more complicated with each new update. Certain players have come along to stretch the limits of what a Red Hive could do, breaking new records and setting new standards for many others to try to follow. This is the complete history and evolution of the Red Hive. The game released on March 3rd, 2018, and Hive colors haven't been truly developed quite yet. A true Red Hive meta would most likely not have been developed during this time. However, I could see many endgame players spamming down Demon and Fire Bees to take advantage of bomb multipliers. In fact, this strategy of spamming pure legendary bees was quite common, especially before gifted bees were introduced. On November 25th, 2018, the Demon Mask had released, one of the 3 new endgame masks introduced into the game. The nature of this mask was geared more for attack, however many players have begun to realize that they could equip this mask and purely farm in rows, assuming this was the only endgame mask that they had possessed. I still remember the days when I would equip my Demon Mask and farm rows all day, and boost in it whenever I could. I'm sure you can imagine how monotonous of a routine this would be, but I had to deal with it. On September 28th, 2019, Bee Swarm had received quite the massive update. This update included the 35 bee zone, introducing 2 new fields, coconut and pepper, as well as many new gear items and consumables like coconuts. The addition of 2 new fields were a huge game changer, as flowers in these fields were of a higher tier, so pollen gathered in these fields would be generally much higher. Of course, the badges in these fields were quite absurd for the time, and it was insanely challenging to even get Grandmaster. Moving forward 3 months later, to December 23rd, 2019, this is when the 2019 Beesmas event had dropped, with a massive update that shook the community. This event was personally one of my favorite updates. This event introduced many things, like the mythic bees, mutations, frogs, the auto jelly system, which was a lifesaver by the way, and all these important balance changes. All the endgame masks had got great buffs, but I want you to focus in on that flame converter buff that the demon mask had received. Keep in mind that's going to be important later. The addition of mythic bees were especially insane, and it was a whole new tier above legendary bees that we were so used to using. These mythic bees were quite unique, but I'm going to discuss the main catalyst that began to form the Red Hive meta. This was the Spicy Bee, and it introduced a gifted ability, which was Flame Fuel. This allowed the Spicy Bee to toss oil into any flames, allowing the flames to last longer while also converting a percentage of your bag. Now, this was insane at the time because there was no other way to convert your bag like this, especially through a bee's ability other than a micro-converter and maybe coconuts. The leaderboard player Mcproseph was one of the first to take notice of this new ability and began stacking it in his hive with tons of Spicy Bees. This allowed him to boost in fields like Pepper and make billions in a single day. Now remember when I mentioned that Demon Mask had a flame conversion buff? This buff paired with Spicy Bee's ability made red an absolute juggernaut of a color, as people could practically stay in their field forever without filling, given that they had a good amount of gifted Spicy Bees in their hive. But with that Demon Mask buff, I don't even know if having all of them gifted was even a necessity. It was just way too overpowered. It was so overpowered that people like Mcproseph would even boost in Pumpkin just because they could. Many other players began to follow suit as they reached the endgame, and began to shift their hives into Spicy Bees. Even the #1 player at the time, Gummadin, admitted in Thnxcya's video that he had to make the shift in order to compete due to the massive amount of numbers that the other players were pulling with Spicy Bee hives.
I recently swapped over to the hard right just because some other people were pulling some incredible numbers with it and I had to compete, so that's the reason why.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, the Spicy Bees just look so cool. There's just like so many of them. They look really cool.
On May 6, 2020, Onnit begins to take notice of this and begins to enact his changes. Demon Mask specifically has its flame conversion decreased by 50% and its instant red conversion decreased by 15%. However, this was also the same time where things like Mono Chick, Purple Potions, and even the Fuzzy Bee were introduced. Fuzzy Bee became quite the game changer, allowing even lower teal fields to be somewhat viable to boost in, increasing the options available for red hives. The issue, however, was because the Demon Mask had such a massive nerf, Spicy Bee's conversion wasn't as powerful, and more micros and coconuts had to be used to compensate. Despite this nerf, it didn't stop red hives from being completely useless just yet. The summer of June 6, 2020 brought yet another massive update. This update revolved around the introduction of the Supreme Star Amulet, the amulet that would forever solidify the trifecta of colors and further pushing each hive color to a new height. This update also dropped Meteors and Super Smooths, the former which will be important to discuss, so keep that in mind. Red had received the Scorching Star, a new passive on the Supreme Star Amulet, which had Flame Conversion, Conversion Links, Red Pollen buffs, and even some capacity after activating 30 red boost tokens. Later on, this would be paired with the Star Saw, which would be an absolute must if you want to be red, as Reds became known as the Hives that had their bags blow up. Now, Red at this time had completely fallen off with the balance changes, so many players opted to go Mixed Hive with Vectors and Boost with Gummy Mask, or even go as Blue Hives with Solo Pop. However, Red still had a secret weapon that many weren't seeing until a certain someone would come in and revolutionize how the game would be played. Around the same time, another player had entered the scene. This player, Jeff, otherwise known as Superclash, began to develop macros for Red Hives. This would be helpful for a variety of reasons. The early Jitbit macros were as effective as a player could simply auto-farm in a small field. In this case, Jeff's macro would farm in Strawberry, and it would make quite a bit of honey thanks to the conversion of both the Spicy Bees and the Scorching Star passive. As this was going on, another two pair of players came along. One was Mcproseph, otherwise known as Trees1, and he was able to make quite a lot as a Red Hive, doing a certain form of newly discovered boosting. This new form of boosting was introduced by one of the most legendary and influential players to ever step foot in the game, and I am referring to none other than Elol himself. He and Mcproseph were able to create a new form of boosting by utilizing meteors, which scales based on the amount of gifted bees that you had in your hive. Where the meteors landed were further enhanced by having helpers going to your fields where you'd had meteors raining down, and your helpers would place sprinklers down in those fields while also providing a constant outpour of jelly beans during your boost. As mentioned in Hero's video, Elol had did a boost with Guiding Saw that was so large in proportions that at the time, on it did an emergency nerf to both Meteors and Guiding Star. Despite the massive nerf, players would still follow suit and continue to boost with Meteors, with the new meta for Red being Scorching Saw Meteor boosts. Beesmas of 2020, Elol along with Gifted Ty continued to push the limits of Red Hives, both doing over 100 trillion boosts on their honey days, and Elol becoming the first to reach a full level 20 hive as a Red Hive player. The 2020 Beesmas event had also introduced bee quips, but these wouldn't garner much attention until later on. Now we have a huge leap to the next year, Beesmas of 2021. This year again marked a major shift in the Red Hive meta, introducing two new mythic bees, Buoyant and Precise. It also brought in the new endgame collectors, Gummy Baller, Tide Popper, and Dark Scythe. Jelly beans were also reworked, so the era of jelly bean spam boosting came to an end here. Nectars were introduced as a new type of compensation, allowing players to build up a maximum of 5 nectars for 24 hours for a variety of buffs. Wins were also increased to 30 minutes, which increased boosting length for all colors across the board. During this time, the old meta of Red was slowly fading out, mainly due to the fact that Blue was garnering the most attention thanks to the macro, but yet another pioneer of Red had emerged. This player was Ben Mew. He utilized the knowledge of the Precise Bee that not many would think about, and slowly improved his boosts over time, and a major skill factor became a requirement to boost as Red, and he showed that not only was Red still viable, it could be mastered and conquered to generate a large amount of honey. The Precise Bee's ability to generate large amounts of honey with its targets paired with the super crit bonuses forced players to have to learn the skill of balancing their movements, maintaining precision, and mastering the upkeeping of the other buffs. Many great Red players would begin to learn from Ben, including Shwari, Name, and many others, including myself. This format of boosting would continue even to Beesmas of 2022, where Robo-Break Challenge was introduced, and the most powerful bee in the game, the Digital Bee, made its debut. This forced many players to grind up their drives on their digital in order to have better corruption and do tokens during their boosts, which would help all colors massively. Red especially had an advantage due to their high raw pollen collection paired with their high attack. This takes us to the present of today, which still remains rather consistent from back when Ben boosted, with the exception of having high amounts of drives on your digital being a necessity as well as having buffs like stickers. It's hard to say whether Red Hives will continue to evolve due to honest lack of any new game-changing content, but I'm sure there will always be players that can step up to the plate and create something extraordinary. There are still Red Hives that have picked up after Elol and Ben, most notably Name, who has recently done a whopping 280 trillion after maxing his digital bee. I'm pretty sure he was rusty during the time of that boost. Players like him are still setting world records and pushing the limits of what players can be able to do. Who knows, maybe you will find yourself at the top one day.